They forged permits, built 55 homes, and crowned themselves kings of stolen land. But they chose the wrong man to ignore. He watched in silence, collected every lie, and when the final house rose, he detonated the truth. Now the empire's crumbling, and he owns the ashes.
I bought the land long before anyone thought it was worth fighting over. 8 acres on the edge of what used to be nothing, back when the nearest grocery store was a long drive, and the idea of a master-planned community out here sounded like a bad joke. I wanted quiet, space, something solid I could point to and say, "This is mine," and no one gets a vote on it. I paid for it clean, with a proper title search, title insurance, surveys, and every piece of paper a cautious man could ask for. I built a modest house near the tree line, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I liked the idea of living small on land that didn't feel small at all. For years, nothing happened. I worked, traveled when I felt like it, came back to the same view every time. The land didn't change, and neither did I. Then, one spring morning, I noticed survey flags, bright orange, stuck into the soil like little warning signs, fluttering just beyond my fence. At first, I assumed the county was doing some routine work. They never told me much, and I never asked, because experience had taught me that asking questions too early only invited answers you didn't want. A week later, I saw men with tripods and measuring wheels. I walked over, coffee in hand, and asked who they were working for. One of them glanced at a clipboard and said something vague about a development project, already approved, all above board. He smiled the way people do when they think you're irrelevant. I went back to my porch and watched them work, making notes in my head without writing anything down. I have learned that the first reaction is rarely the right one. When the machines arrived, I knew it wasn't routine. Trucks, graders, noise that didn't belong out here. Dust hung in the air like a fog. I pulled up the county land registry online that evening, more out of irritation than concern, and that was when the first real crack appeared. My parcel number was still there, but the status was wrong. Not sold, not transferred, not even disputed. It was marked as unassigned, as if the last 15 years of ownership had been politely erased. I checked again. Different browser, different database, same result. According to the public record, my land was free and clear for development. According to the stack of documents in my safe, it very much was not. That was the moment the noise from the construction site stopped being annoying and started being interesting. I pulled out my original deed, the survey maps, the tax record showing I had paid every year without fail. Everything lined up perfectly on my end. The mistake was not subtle either. Boundary coordinates had been shifted just enough to swallow my acreage into a larger development zone labeled with a friendly name, and an even friendlier homeowners association. I followed the digital trail to the permit filings and found the signature authorizing the land as available. Joel Green, Department of Land Use, a name I recognized from old articles about ethics complaints that never quite stuck. I did not call a lawyer. I did not march down to City Hall. I did not stop the equipment or shout at anyone in a hard hat. Instead, I sat at my desk and started collecting. Screenshots of the registry before it could change again. Copies of every filing I could access. Dates, timestamps, version histories. I requested certified copies through official channels, polite and patient. The way someone sounds when they are not in a hurry because they know time is working for them. By summer, the skeletons of houses were rising where my trees used to be. Roads were carved, utilities laid, signs planted announcing a future that had apparently decided I didn't exist. Neighbors I had never met waved at me from across freshly poured asphalt, already acting like this place had always belonged to them. I waved back. It costs nothing to be civil. Every evening I updated my files. Every week I sent another formal request, this time to federal land authorities, asking a very simple question dressed up in bureaucratic language. How exactly had my legally owned land become available for private development without my knowledge or consent? I did not accuse. I did not threaten. I asked them to look. Construction accelerated. 55 homes, according to the project overview. Luxury branding. Community values. I watched them build every single one of them, knowing that the louder it got, the quieter I would remain. Silence, in situations like this, is not passive. It is strategic. They kept building. Trucks came and went like clockwork, framing crews hammering from dawn until the last sliver of light. Sod was rolled out, irrigation trenches dug, cable lines installed with surgical precision. It was a full-scale invasion, disguised as progress. From the outside, I looked like the old recluse on the edge of the new suburb, someone clinging to past glory while the future moved on. Let them think that. The less they suspected, the better. I didn't intervene. I didn't even speak to them again. But every morning, I sat on my porch with a notebook and a zoom lens, tracking the build like it was a military exercise. Lot numbers, construction phases, who delivered what and when. Some of the workers began to wave to me like I was part of the scenery. One of them called out, "You gonna miss all this quiet when we're done?" I smiled. That was the most honest thing anyone had said yet. Behind the scenes, my files grew. I had started keeping printed copies, not just digital, because paper can't be hacked. I built a binder thicker than a trial brief, screenshots from the county registry with timestamps, copies of site plans, notarized letters I mailed to multiple agencies, state and federal. Everything was meticulous. If anyone ever asked why I waited, I wanted to make sure the answer was, because I was building a case. It wasn't just about proving that someone had stolen my land. It was about showing how they had done it, step by step, with layers of forged legality. That's what made it dangerous, and what would make it damning. I submitted a formal request to the U.S. Department of the Interior's Land Resource Division, not expecting a quick answer. Bureaucracy doesn't move fast unless it smells smoke, and I intended to let the fire build quietly. The submission alone was over 30 pages long. I requested a formal investigation into the permit issued by Joel Green, citing evidence of boundary manipulation, irregular registration, and potential collusion between private developers and the municipal land office. I didn't accuse anyone by name, but the trail was easy enough to follow if someone actually bothered to look. While I waited, the neighborhood blossomed like a tumor. The first model home went up. Pristine white siding, plastic lawn, flags out front. A massive sign appeared near the entrance. Southwoods Community Living, now selling. It listed amenities, dog park, communal gardens, high-speed fiber. No mention of how the dirt under it all had been acquired. That same week, I walked the edge of my property and counted survey stakes placed inside my legal boundary. Not near it, inside it. I photographed each one with GPS overlay and cross-referenced it with my original plat map. I sent that packet straight to the Bureau of Land Management. Still no answer, but I wasn't discouraged. In fact, I was hoping the silence meant they were digging deeper than I could see. Then came the mail. A glossy pamphlet addressed to resident, offering me the chance to buy into the Southwoods HOA at founders' rates. That one made me laugh. I scanned the entire thing and added it to my growing archive. By now, the noise from construction had become background static. I didn't care. I had learned a long time ago that rage makes people sloppy. But quiet? Quiet is deadly. Mid-autumn, I got a letter back. Not from the state. Not from the county. From Washington. An official envelope from the Office of the Inspector General. It was short and polite, the way dangerous letters often are. It confirmed that my materials had been received, that the parcel in question had previously been registered to my name, that a preliminary discrepancy in boundary records had been identified and flagged for escalation. It ended with a sentence that told me everything I needed to know. A formal investigation has been initiated. Please do not contact local agencies directly until further notice. That was it. No promises, no timeline, just confirmation that someone, finally, was watching. And I knew in that moment that if I had spoken up months earlier, none of this would have happened. The project would have stalled, paperwork would have been shuffled, and the evidence would have dried up like a puddle in July. But now they had built everything. And that meant I was holding the fuse to a very expensive bomb. By late spring, the celebration banners were up. South Woods was no longer a plan on paper or a parade of construction dust. It was a fully formed neighborhood, complete with imported trees, smiling families, and freshly painted curbs. They even hosted a ribbon-cutting ceremony with a food truck and a miniature petting zoo. I stood just far enough outside the crowd to avoid polite conversation, but close enough to see who shook whose hand. The president of the HOA, a man named Carter Winslow, gave a smug little speech about community vision and sustainable growth. He wore a navy blazer despite the heat and called the development a shining example of responsible urban expansion. Cameras flashed. Kids played in inflatable bounce houses set up on what used to be my northern tree line. The following Monday, I received a second letter from the Inspector General's office. This one wasn't polite. It informed me that the Federal Review had uncovered deliberate falsifications of property records, including altered coordinate mappings and unauthorized changes to title designations. It went on to state that the original permit issued by Joel Green had been or executed under materially fraudulent conditions, and that an official inquiry into criminal misconduct had begun. I sat on my porch with the letter in my hand and listened to the sound of lawnmowers from the shiny new homes, people cutting grass they technically didn't own yet. It was almost funny. Almost. That same week, I filed a civil suit in state court. 1 count of unlawful conversion of real property, 2 counts of fraudulent transfer, and a petition for emergency injunction. I attached over 100 pages of supporting documentation, including my deed, my original plat, the digital audit trail, and a certified analysis of the manipulated GIS data used in the permit filings. My lawyer, a slow-talking bulldog named Patrice Heller, submitted the case under expedited motion due to the scale of damages. And then I went public. I sent a letter to the Austin Tribune, attaching a redacted version of my complaint. The subject line was short. They built a neighborhood on my land. I waited. Now I'm suing everyone. It got picked up fast, first local blogs, then regional outlets, and by the end of the week, I had 3 voicemail messages from national media asking for interviews. I said no to all of them. I wasn't interested in camera crews. I was interested in leverage. The suit hit the HOA like a pipe bomb in a glass house. First, the title company suspended all pending transfers in Southwoods. No mortgages could close. Buyers who had already sold their old homes were stuck in limbo. Several began calling the HOA office daily, at first politely, then with threats of legal action. Then, the city planning office froze all permitting for adjacent lots connected to the project. Next came the banks. When word got out that a federal investigation was underway and that the land in question might be tied to criminal misconduct, the development's loans, nearly $40 million worth, were reclassified as high risk. Insurance carriers followed suit, raising rates and demanding risk disclosures in every closing document. Most of the buyers had no idea what was happening yet, but the best part, the absolute cherry on top, was Joel Green. He didn't just get suspended. He got roasted. Local reporters dug up old ethics complaints, then found inconsistencies in 4 other zoning approvals he'd signed in the past 3 years. Someone unearthed an internal memo showing he'd personally pushed for Southwood's approval despite objections from 2 junior planners. His department issued a statement calling it a matter of concern, which is government speak for "we're trying to save our own asses." The developer, a corporate shell named Waymark Urban Holdings, tried to play dumb. They issued a press release claiming they had acted in good faith based on all available public records. It was a nice effort, but their own permit request used boundary coordinates that didn't exist until 6 months before construction began. I knew that. The federal investigators knew that. And soon enough, a judge was going to know it too. I went for a walk that evening. Southwoods was quiet. Too quiet. The sound of drills and construction crews had vanished, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional angry phone call through thin walls. A sign outside the HOA clubhouse read, "Community meeting, residents only. Wednesday, 7 p.m. I wasn't invited, but I was already there. They didn't come for me with lawyers first. No, the initial attempt was far more polite. The HOA sent me a letter, printed on expensive paper with a gold-embossed crest that looked like it belonged to a country club, not a housing board. It was signed by Carter Winslow himself, president of the Southwoods Homeowners Association. He invited me to a private mediation meeting to explore paths toward mutually beneficial resolution. It was held in a rented conference room at a Marriott downtown. Classy. I brought Patrice with me. She wore a charcoal gray suit and a look on her face that said, "I've buried better men than you with less evidence." We didn't come to talk. We came to listen. Across the table sat Carter, 2 lawyers in ill-fitting suits, and a woman I recognized from the development's promotional material, Melissa Trent, the so-called Community Strategy Director. Whatever the hell that means. They opened with flattery. How much they respected my position. How unfortunate the clerical mix-up had been. How deeply they wanted to make this right without dragging things through years of court. Then came the offer. They'd generously provide me with a compensation package. 2 homes in the Southwoods complex, plus a lifetime revenue share from HOA membership dues, plus a position on the board as community co-founder emeritus. They even offered to name one of the main roads after me, Rains Way. I didn't say anything. Patrice did. She asked one question. "If you're offering him this much, how much are you afraid he's going to win?" That shut them up. We walked out without shaking hands. 2 days later, I received a cease and desist letter accusing me of defamation. The irony was almost poetic. They pivoted fast. What started as diplomacy turned into open warfare. A local real estate blog ran a suspiciously detailed, investigative piece, painting me as a bitter eccentric, trying to extort money from an award-winning community project. It included distorted photos of me walking along the perimeter of Southwoods, cropped to make me look vaguely threatening. One image even had the caption, "The man who would stop progress." That made me laugh, until I saw the second article. This one suggested I had previously defaulted on taxes and only recently reclaimed the property through legal technicalities. Complete fiction. But it worked. The comments under the piece were a cesspool of HOA Kool-Aid. Words like squatter, grifter, and fraud tossed around by people who wouldn't recognize a warranty deed if you stapled it to their face. But I wasn't worried. I knew where this was headed. Desperation always escalates. And sure enough, things started getting dirty. One night, I came home from a supply run and found the gate to my workshop open. Padlock cut clean through. Inside, nothing stolen, but someone had knocked over my filing cabinet and torn apart a stack of archived printouts. They had left in a hurry. An overturned thermos and a half-smoked cigarette still sat on my workbench. I called the sheriff, filed the report, and sent a copy straight to the federal team. That week, 2 of my outdoor security cameras were ripped clean off the posts. I upgraded the system, installed backups, and set alerts to ping my phone in real time. I didn't tell anyone I'd also wired the perimeter with infrared trip sensors. Old habits. Then came the documents. My lawyer received an envelope, hand-delivered and unsigned, containing what was supposed to be a PRONFA deed transfer document. Allegedly signed by me, dated 10 years ago. According to this evidence, I had transferred my land to a shell entity that had since dissolved, and that same entity had passed ownership on to the Southwoods development through a community land trust. Problem was, the shell entity didn't exist before last year. And the signature on the form? It was mine, sure. Or rather, a very good digital forgery of it. But someone had copied it from a scanned PDF I'd submitted to the zoning board for a totally unrelated matter in 2014. The attempt was so clumsy, it was almost offensive. Patrice took one look at it and said, "They're panicking." We traced the origin of the forgery to a small notary office in Round Rock, a place that had shut down mysteriously 3 months prior. No records, no forwarding contact, and the notary of record was now traveling abroad. Of course they were. Patrice filed an emergency motion with the judge handling the civil suit. Within 48 hours, we had a court order demanding that all property transactions within Southwoods be frozen indefinitely. Pending forensic investigation. Every sale, every mortgage, every HOA contract, dead in the water. Then came the HOA meeting. I hadn't planned to attend. I figured they'd spend the evening chewing through PR talking points and threatening each other with bylaws. But someone slid a flyer under my door. Handwritten. It read, "They're trying something big. Be there. You'll want to see it." No signature. I showed up early, sat in the back with a baseball cap pulled low. About 50 residents packed into the clubhouse. You could feel the tension. People checking their phones, whispering angrily. When Carter stepped up to the mic, he looked like a man trying to keep his suit dry during a hurricane. He began by talking about unforeseen legal challenges and external actors disrupting community harmony. The crowd wasn't buying it. A woman in the front row stood up and yelled, "You told us everything was fine when we signed. Where's our money, Carter?" Then a man in the back, tall, older, with a press badge, raised his hand. "I'm Brandon West, Austin Herald. Are you aware that documents have surfaced suggesting the HOA attempted to fabricate ownership claims over land they never legally acquired?" Carter froze. Someone dropped a phone. Another person muttered, "Jesus." Brandon kept going. "I've seen the forged deed. I've seen the metadata on the scanned copy. You want to tell this room why you're falsifying documents and selling houses on land you don't own?" The room exploded. I left before it turned into a riot. I had everything I needed. The first court hearing was set for a Monday morning, and by the time I pulled into the courthouse parking lot, there were already people with cameras standing on the sidewalk. Most weren't there for me. Not yet. They were there because the case had grown bigger than anyone expected. Bigger than me, bigger than Southwoods, bigger than the HOA. This wasn't just a land dispute anymore. This was shaping up to be a state-level scandal with federal overtones. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was stiffer than a church funeral. Opposing counsel, now expanded to 3 lawyers in matching navy suits, avoided eye contact like I was contagious. Carter Winslow wasn't present. His name was on the docket, but he was traveling for a medical procedure. Sure he was. Joel Green, however, had no such excuse. He walked in through the side door, looking like he'd aged 20 years in the past 2 weeks. No smile, no swagger, just sweat. Patrice opened with a motion to admit the forensic analysis of the forged deed into evidence. The judge barely glanced up before approving it. Then she slid over a second file, the inspection report from the federal office confirming illegal coordinate manipulation in the GIS data used to greenlight the Southwoods permit. The room went silent. HOA counsel fumbled for their response. They tried to argue that the discrepancies were technical oversights, that the deed in question might have been misfiled, and that Joel Green had acted in the best interests of regional housing growth. I almost snorted. Best interests, my ass. Then the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with the tone of a lifelong librarian, looked up and said, "Are you asking this court to believe that a private development corporation, using falsified documentation and a non-existent land trust, acquired and developed over 50 residences without realizing the land was not theirs?" Dead silence. And just like that, the court ordered a prior preliminary injunction. No sales, no mortgages, no new construction, no HOA dues collection, no utilities expansion. Southwoods was now a punishment or frozen zone. But the storm hadn't even hit yet. 2 days later, the Department of Housing and Urban Development launched a formal inquiry into Waymark Urban Holdings. Apparently, my case had triggered a red flag that linked Southwoods to 4 other residential projects. In Central Texas, all involving fast-tracked permits, unusually quiet land acquisitions, and, wouldn't you know it, Joel Green's signature. Meanwhile, Brandon West, the journalist from the HOA meeting, published the first of a 3-part exposé in the Austin Herald. The Southwoods Papers, How a Neighborhood Was Built on Stolen Dirt. He'd gotten his hands on internal emails from the HOA's own legal team, where they openly discussed legalizing the acquisition later and burying objections under procedural delay. The story went viral. Every local station picked it up. A congressional subcommittee started sniffing around. Brandon got a call from a Netflix producer. And Carter Winslow? He tried to hold a press conference to clarify the timeline. It lasted 11 minutes before someone threw a copy of the lawsuit at his chest and screamed, "You sold me a lie!" Then came the real kicker. A former junior planner from the Land Use Department stepped forward with a sworn affidavit. In it, she claimed that Joel Green had personally overridden her objections to the Southwoods permit, instructed her to backdate approval documents, and told her, quote, "It's already a done deal, just rubber stamp it." That affidavit was enough for the Aki Attorney General's office to open a criminal investigation. Charges were being considered: conspiracy, fraud, falsification of public records, and racketeering. Joel Green's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The judge denied it, pending full evidentiary review. I kept my head down. Didn't gloat. Didn't smile. Just kept showing up day after day in the same old flannel shirt, while their entire machine burned from the inside out. At the next court date, a new name appeared on the docket. The people of the state of Texas versus Carter Winslow et al. I wasn't even needed for the testimony that day. I watched from the back, sipping weak courthouse coffee, while a forensic accountant explained how HOA funds had been diverted into a dummy company owned by Winslow's cousin. Classic. The judge issued a temporary receivership order. An independent administrator would now control the Southwoods HOA until further notice. That meant Carter was done. The board was suspended. And every homeowner, innocent or not, was stuck in legal purgatory until the matter resolved. Some tried to reach out. A few knocked on my gate. One woman sobbed about her down payment, how she just wanted a safe place to raise her kids. I didn't blame her. Most of these folks had no idea they were squatting on stolen ground. They were victims, too. But I couldn't fix their problems. Not yet. I had my own cleanup to finish. I drove through Southwoods one night, windows down, letting the air fill with the smell of unfinished dreams and slow panic. Lights were on in maybe half the homes. Lawns unkempt. Driveways empty. One yard still had balloons tied to a mailbox. A welcome home that had come too late. Or maybe never at all. And then, parked near the old model home, I saw a sign someone had stabbed into the grass. Black marker on cardboard. Who really owns this place? I didn't stop to answer. The final hearing wasn't cinematic. No gavel slam, no gasps in the gallery, no last-minute confession from the villain. Just a federal judge with reading glasses halfway down her nose, quietly flipping through a stack of documents before saying, without a hint of drama, "Based on the evidence presented, the court finds for the plaintiff on all counts." That was it. My land, officially, undeniably, legally, was mine again. Not just in the dusty old way it had always been, but now in headlines and court transcripts. The development was ruled an unlawful encroachment. The permit was nullified. The homes were deemed non-conforming structures built on misappropriated land, which, in legal terms, meant every buyer was now living in a house with a giant asterisk next to the deed. And as for me, I was awarded compensatory damages, substantial ones. The judge used phrases like lost commercial opportunity, unjust enrichment, and intentional deprivation of property rights. The final number made my lawyer raise an eyebrow. Then she grinned and whispered, "You're not just getting your land back, you're getting paid for every nail they drove into it." The HOA, if you could still call it that, was ordered to dissolve. Waymark Urban Holdings declared bankruptcy 3 weeks later, trying to shield itself from the avalanche of lawsuits coming in from angry homeowners, investors, banks, and title insurers. I didn't care. I wasn't after their money. I was after what they'd built. And now that I owned the land underneath every single one of those 55 homes, I had options. Most of the homeowners tried to negotiate. I don't blame them. They were stuck in houses they couldn't legally sell, couldn't refinance, couldn't even list on Airbnb without triggering a legal notice. I met with a few of them individually, listened, took notes. Some were hostile, others just exhausted. But there was one meeting I'll never forget. A woman in her 30s, single mom, 2 kids, mortgage underwater, job in healthcare. She sat across from me at a local diner, hands shaking as she passed over a letter from her lender. Foreclosure notice, courtesy of a bank that had realized the collateral was now radioactive. She didn't ask for a handout. She asked for time. I gave her more than that. By the end of that month, I'd purchased the first home in Southwoods, then the second, then the 6th. The prices? Pennies. The market had cratered under the weight of uncertainty. I didn't push. I let them come to me. And when I owned 10, I made an announcement. The start of the Puits. Rain's Foundation for Equitable Housing, a nonprofit using the reclaimed development to provide low-cost, long-term rentals for working families displaced by financial fraud, zoning abuse, or corporate overreach. In other words, people like the ones who had been duped by Southwoods. The press ate it up. Brandon West ran a follow-up series titled From Victim to Vanguard, framing me as a reluctant hero who'd turned a personal land theft into a city-wide reckoning. I didn't correct him. Let the narrative run. It helped keep the right people nervous. And oh, they were nervous. The fallout spread far beyond Texas. The Department of Justice quietly launched a review of similar developments across 4 states. Joel Green, facing indictment, flipped like a cheap lawn chair and handed over a list of every project where he'd expedited approvals. Some of the names on that list had been untouchable. Until now. Carter Winslow? He tried to disappear, changed his name, sold his house, moved to Arizona under a shell identity. But Brandon tracked him down and ran a Sunday special titled The HOA King in Exile. It wasn't flattering. By winter, I was getting calls from other landowners, small voices in big systems, people who'd had fences moved, parcels split, permits denied, suddenly realizing their error might have been deliberate all along. Some just wanted advice, others wanted blood. I gave what I could. I never thought I'd become that guy. The property rights crusader, the symbol of resistance against HOA tyranny and bureaucratic collusion. Hell, I used to avoid answering my own phone. But now, people were listening, and that made it worth picking up. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. There were developers who called me a saboteur, investors who claimed I'd destroyed a vibrant economic zone, local officials who muttered troublemaker under their breath when I showed up at city meetings. One even said I had set a dangerous precedent. Damn right I did. I'd taken back what was mine. Not just with noise, not with threats, not by chaining myself to a bulldozer. I waited. I watched. I documented. And when the time came, I lit the match with a calm hand and let their whole house of lies burn from the inside out. Now, the ashes were mine. On a warm Sunday morning, almost a year to the day since the first foundation was poured on stolen ground, I walked through Southwoods with a cup of coffee in hand. The same streets, once lined with marketing banners and fresh paint, now carried a different rhythm. Kids playing on sidewalks, dogs barking from porches, neighbors chatting over fences that weren't HOA approved but made with their own hands. No one tried to sell me anything. No one warned me about community standards. No clipboard warriors in golf carts. Just people. Living. Most of the houses now belonged to the foundation. The paperwork had taken months, but one by one we closed the deals, sometimes for less than the cost of a new car. A few of the original residents stayed on, grateful for stable rent and no surprise fees. Others left, angry, embarrassed, or both. I didn't chase them. You can't force peace on people who still believe they bought it in square footage. What used to be the Southwoods Clubhouse, that whitewashed monument to bad taste and control, now operated as a community center. We took down the plaques and portraits of HOA board members and replaced them with shelves full of books, folding tables for job training workshops, and a fridge stocked with free lunches for kids who needed them. One wall held framed articles from the Austin Herald. Brandon West had mailed them over himself, each signed with a note, "You made 'em blink." The centerpiece was his most brutal headline, printed in bold type across the top. They tried to bulldoze a man. They built him a kingdom. Brandon showed up now and then, working on a documentary follow-up. He liked to ask rhetorical questions into the camera like, "What does justice actually look like when it's built on a pile of prefabs and HOA bylaws?" I let him talk. The world needs voices louder than mine. Joel Green pled out, got a reduced sentence in exchange for names. Last I heard, he was out on parole and banned from holding any public office for life. Carter Winslow, meanwhile, was fighting civil suits in 3 states and being sued by his own former board members. He made the rounds on fringe podcasts, whining about deep state land manipulation and weaponized property activism. A grift always finds its next form. I never responded. I didn't need to. Late one afternoon, as I was repainting the community tool shed, a boy about 10 years old rode up on a bike with training wheels that had seen better days. He stopped, stared for a second, then asked, "Are you Mr. Raines?" I nodded. He grinned. "My mom said you used to own this whole neighborhood. Is that true?" I looked around, the homes, the people, the sounds of a place finally breathing on its own. "No," I said. "I still do." He laughed and pedaled off, wobbling slightly but determined. I watched him go until he turned the corner, vanishing between 2 rows of houses that never should have existed, but now did, on my terms. As the sun dipped behind the last roofline, I sat back on the porch of my old house, which now stood like a quiet anchor at the edge of everything. No HOA, no hearings, no golden paper invitations to compromise. Just a man, some land, and the silence of a fight that had already been won.